material things, but what we are is basically the overseas distributor for NUNO. And I've been a friend of Reiko's. I lived in Japan for a large part of my life. And I've been a friend of Reiko's really since NUNO started. But when I was talking, it's about time I went back to the United States. She said, well, why don't you do NUNO when you're there? And I said, okay. And so I've been back almost 20 years now and have been working at NUNO as the main distributor. Our primary business originally when we first started was mostly interior fabrics. Fabrics for window treatments, fabrics for upholstery. But gradually our business has changed, and right now we're probably more finished products. In other words, the clothing line, the accessories, things like that. So, but let me tell you a little bit about NUNO. NUNO was started about 40 years ago by Reiko Sudo, who is still the head designer, and Junichi Arai. Some of you will have heard of Junichi Arai. He's kind of considered the father of contemporary Japanese textiles. He died a couple years ago, but he worked a lot with Issey Miyake, and together they developed, for example, pleats. So Issey Miyake still does pleats, please. And so they're kind of the work that Junichi Arai and Issey Miyake did in textiles was really pretty revolutionary. But he wasn't cut out for running a company, so he really only stayed at NUNO as one of the co-founders for a couple years. Since then, it's been basically Reiko Sudo. And she was really from the next generation of textile designers. And today, Reiko has become very well known. NUNO textiles are the most collected by museums in the world of any textile line right now. And the company started out with a philosophy that everything, they don't make handmade textiles. Now occasionally we will have one, but generally not. They're machine made. But every textile has to show the touch of someone. It has to show a human touch, that someone did something to it. It can be really specific. For example, if you see there's some hairy, kind of like one like this, kind of a hairy looking textile. Yeah. This one is woven, and these flat threads you see sticking out are woven as loops. And these loops are then later cut to make this kind of shaggy texture. So that would be the hand you're seeing in this one. So they're very small lot production. I would say often as small as 20 to 50 yards. The biggest production we do is probably a couple hundred yards. And that seems like a lot of fabric, but it's not. In a textile production, that's a very small production. What Reiko and Junichi Arai did was network the existing small family looms across Japan. And these were basically going for generations and generations and had unbelievable knowledge and technique. But Japanese women don't wear kimonos like they used to. A lot of inexpensive production, of course, moved on to, for example, China, places like this. So they were having in the 1970s, when NUNO was beginning to be organized, they were really kind of dying off. And when you lost a weaver, you lost their accumulated knowledge. And so they wanted to revitalize this, so they networked them and used a lot of these techniques. They use contemporary design, often very high-tech fibers, but they're woven in these factories that have the traditional weaving techniques. And so that's how NUNO started, and they did design, then they used this network of family-owned factories to produce the actual textiles, and then they sold them in their retail store in Roppongi in Tokyo. They didn't wholesale at the beginning at all. So it was really start to finish. today they have outlets in some Japanese department stores, and they have me. But they originally started out as really beginning to end was almost a closed loop, except for these family-run factories. They didn't purchase those, they contracted them. So, and what's interesting is some of these factories, their techniques are so specific that if the factory for some reason decides to close, we can't make that fabric anymore. And that happens quite often, so. But I think the easiest way would be to talk about some of these fabrics that we have the panels of hanging here, the tapestries. Another philosophy of NUNO is that they're hoping to have zero waste production. And what they do with that is that, for example, when they make the clothing line, things like that, you have scraps left over. So they have, what can you do with them? Well, you can turn them into a new textile. And these textiles are interesting. They're both done in embroidery factories on a steering wheel embroidery machine. And a steering wheel embroidery machine is a multi-headed embroidery machine. That means it looks like, you know, a bunch of sewing machines connected. And it's called steering wheel because most of the operations can be done by the operator's feet. Leaves his hands free to use the steering wheel to do fairly complicated patterns. So for example, this one here, they start with a silk background fabric. They lay the pattern out, they lay these swatches out, each one of them are hand selected and hand cut. They're laid out on it. Then the entire package is put through the embroidery machines, and these swatches are attached permanently to the base, becoming this textile. The one here is kind of the same thing. They're laid out on a piece of water-soluble backing, a water-soluble ground, this white one. They're laid out in a more random and more condensed pattern. This is put through the embroidery machine. When the back is washed out, basically you have these all connected in a web of embroidery thread. And that's how that textile is made. There's only one steering wheel embroidery machine in Japan, and that's the factory we use. Then this one here is a different process. This uses traditional Japanese washi paper. And what happens is that you have a pattern that is silk screened onto the base. In this case, it's polyester. And a pattern of discs is silk screened onto that. The paper is laid on top. When it dries, it's washed, and wherever it isn't attached, washes away. So you end up with this pattern of ovals on this backing. And then the silk screen is moved half a step down, and another layer is added, so you have these overlapping discs. And it's laminated again and washed out, so you get this pattern. Japanese washi paper is very, very strong, very durable. This is a great window treatment fabric, actually. We've used that a lot for curtains, for sliders in front of big glass windows. But then another panel is the one in the window there, which is part of our origami pleats series. And origami pleats is actually, we have a patent on that. It's almost impossible to get a patent on a fabric, but that one we do it. What origami pleats is, one day Reiko was with the other designers out at lunch, our head designer, and one of the designers was bored. So she started folding the paper that her chopsticks came into in an origami pattern, in a structure. And Reiko saw that, she said, well, if you can do that to paper, why can't we do that to fabric? So the technology behind it all is the thermoplastic capabilities of polyester, and that's what Issei Miyake and Junichi and I had originally worked on to make the pleated fabric. And what that is when you heat polyester to a certain temperature, the shape will never change. So if you put in a pleat and you heat it to that temperature, that pleat is permanent. And unless you would heat it above that temperature again, that pleat will be in that fabric no matter what. You can wash it, you can do anything, but that pleat will stay there. Basically, the fibers, the polyester fibers, are melted into that shape. So Reiko came up with the idea. She took a fairly stiff paper and folded an origami pattern structure, tucked polyester into that, and then heat set the entire thing. So then when you pull the polyester out, it is heat set into that structure and will always stay like that. And that's how this series started. And there are now several different fabrics within that series, which is kind of interesting. So that's another technique NUNO has. And then finally, these are what we're best known in the United States for is our shawls. They're merino wool, which is a long fibered wool, so it's not scratchy. And they're done on old jacquard looms that were used to make obi, which are the Japanese belts. Well, obi, they don't sell anywhere near as many obi as they used to. So actually the width of these scarves is the width of an obi. And so we started making these in these factories that still have these old jacquard looms. There's 6 of these looms in Japan. 2 of them had mechanical problems last month. So we're down to 4, so I'm a little nervous right now. Hopefully they'll get the other 2 fixed, but that's how we started doing this jacquard woven wool. And the fabrics, the first one, well, one of the first ones we did was this one, rhombus, probably 30, 35 years ago. And this one, this is arrow feathers, is another kind of classic. And then the dots, this one here is another classic fabric we've been making for many, many years. But we usually add 2 or 3 new patterns a year. And that's what this came from. So that's kind of an overview of NUNO. Everything you see made here will be, for example, this was another related embroidery fabric. This is basically, the pattern is embroidered onto, again, a water-soluble bag. When it's washed out, you're left with the net. So a lot of the techniques NUNO uses are reflected in these scarves and shawls. Whoops, I just lost it. So, does anyone have any questions? Yes?
I wanted to know about the one with the little patches. I mean, like
that one's really interesting. It's a jacquard. It's on the jacquard looms. It's a very difficult read, and what it is these actually are little pockets. If you look on this side, and the way they do that is the looms are set. They're done on basically on punch cards, and they're set. The needle doesn't, in this area, it doesn't pass through when they're being woven. It doesn't pass all the way through. So you leave this space open, and then it's sealed at the end. So it's just a complicated weave. Yes.
You said that they're woven in factories, and
Yeah.
I know in this country we think of factories
Yeah.
as being these huge things.
No.
So can you describe really where, what
Okay, a lot
the
of
kind of facility that is weaving?
We make textiles all over Japan, depending on the textile, but our largest production center is in Kiryu, which is north of Tokyo. And that's where the jacquard machines are. When I say factory, imagine an old shed with 1 or 2 rusty old machines in it.
Yeah.
And maybe an 80-year-old woman crouched over it, meticulously watching each. That's what a factory is.
And it's
very
an individual family.
individual family, and maybe has gone on for 5, 6 generations.
Yeah.
Which is why you don't really want it to die out.
Yeah.
Because that specific factory or specific shed
Yeah.
has hundreds of years of technique that will be lost. But the young generation, it's hard to convince them that staying in the countryside bent over an old loom is a glamorous career. But actually, it's working. We've had some of the next generation has taken over the factory and is enjoying doing it. So it's been a success. Yes.
Just a connected question, but thank you for the talk before I
No,
ask.
no,
It's
no.
great talk. So in that network
Yes.
of firms, are those firms specializing in parts of the production process, or are they doing different
Yeah,
weavings
of
from
course,
beginning
well-
to end? But so,
Well, actually, yeah, I just talked about the weaving.
yeah,
They are doing, probably one place is doing all the weaving. But to get there, first of all, you had to do the dyeing. You had to, and those are all separate factories. And depending on the specifics for that particular textile design, you're probably using 2 or 3 experts. They may not be in the same area of Japan. Then when we're talking a process, like for example this, you're dealing with the washi, the paper manufacturer. You're dealing with the place that does the silk screening. You're dealing with a lot of different,
and your firm is
yeah,
linking those?
linking them,
Yeah.
organizing them, handling them, often pretty closely. I mean, they're often standing there in the factory doing it. But yeah, so we do everything. Everything is handled in-house except for production. Now, some of the production, like some of the ones, for example, these, you'll notice the one on the left are just cut into squares. These ones are kind of square with a little triangle in the middle of it. Those are the NUNO designers, when they're sitting around and have spare time, have a stack of scraps next to them instead of a pair of scissors doing it. So actually, the NUNO designers are very hands-on too. But that's the whole thing. It has to show, we're supposedly showing the hand of the artist. Just to let you know, this is kind of an interesting idea. NUNO was asked, Reiko was asked by the Japanese government what they could do to revitalize the silk industry in Japan. There's only 2 silk producing areas in Japan, towns. One of them has very wide looms, and so they're okay. They're doing well. The other silk producing village has very narrow looms. The problem is that one function of the Japanese empress is that she grows silkworms, silk cocoons, and oversees the production of silk fabric. The place that was financially not viable anymore was the place that was for the empress. So they couldn't let the industry die off there. So they sent Reiko, the government asked Reiko to go and see what she could think of. So they expected her to give ideas of how to create other fabrics on these looms or other uses of silk. Well, she was in the factory and she saw a pile of trash over in the corner, these weird kind of, what they were the outsides of the silk cocoons. And the outsides of the silk cocoon is also silk, but it's a very tough silk and it protects the inside. And it's very short fibered. So if it's short fibered, it means you really can't spin it. And she said, what's that? And it's something called kibiso, which is a type of the outside of the silk cocoon. And she said, why can't we use that? And you said, it's impossible, use it for animal feed. Because kibiso because it's a protein, so they're able to feed. And she said, I think we can do something. So she got some of the retired weaving people in the village to try to spin these short fibers into something. And they came out first of all with this yarn that was probably this big around. And so first they produced like traditional Japanese sandals out of that. And well, they kept doing it until it was down to a thin enough thread that it could be used on mechanized looms. And started actually, so there's actually now a kibiso industry in that village that now is government run. Reiko's still doing the designs for their things. But in this midpoint in this process of turning these basically outsides of the silk cocoon into a thread, they'd gotten the thread into a fairly rough, but it was able to be used in mechanized machines, but it wasn't really fine yet. And so she used it in here. If you look at these white lines every so often, there's kind of a rough textural thread. That's the kibiso in a cotton scarf. So she added it to that. Now the kibiso, they've gotten it down so thin that it's a very soft really the texture is like a soft cotton.
Well, the roughness is beautiful.
This, well, you said it's a design element, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, when you're walking around, be free to ask me anything. If I may know, I may not know. But now we're going to talk to someone who's a lot more knowledgeable than I am.
Thank you.